Good morning, folks. We've got a story tonight that is so big, so crazy, it makes Succession look like a school play. Forget the minor stuff. The real drama is happening right here. Right now, in a federal courthouse that had to upgrade its ventilation system just to handle the sheer volume of political heat being generated. The most important, most earth-shattering question in American politics was finally being answered. Who cracks first? And the answer, the one that blindsided everyone from Mar-a-Lago to the halls of Congress, was the one person nobody thought had the courage, the legal exposure, or frankly, the better judgment to do it. Picture this, the daughter, the golden child, the one who was supposed to humanize the brand, the one and only Ivanka Trump, walked into that grand jury room. She wasn't there to defend her father. She was there to dismantle him. The prosecutors weren't playing chess, they were playing Jenga, and they just pulled out the bottom block with Ivanka's name on it. This is not a political confrontation. This is a family civil war being broadcast live on the Constitution. The grand jury room, folks, was less grand and more aggressively beige, designed to remind everyone that even global conspiracies had to deal with fluorescent lighting. The 23 jurors, a beautiful mix of Americans who definitely didn't sign up for this level of drama, watched as Ivanka, in a Navy Armani suit that probably cost more than the prosecutor's yearly salary, settled into the witness chair. The gravity in that room was so thick you could carve it. The prosecution team, led by Margaret Chen, a Department of Justice veteran who apparently collects indictments like Pokemon cards, had spent 18 months assembling the evidence. We're talking mountains of financial records, encrypted texts, and the sudden, suspiciously convenient memory recovery of every former White House staffer who got fired. It was all circumstantial, though, the legal equivalent of a beautiful, expensive scaffold. What Chen needed was the internal plumbing, the emotional wiring, the person who wasn't just near the room where it happened, but who was literally seated at the head of the mahogany table. She needed the ultimate insider. The unofficial diplomat who carried secret messages and reviewed statements of profit and loss over avocado toast. The decision for Ivanka to testify was described as a grueling process, months of intense late-night, hushed conversations with Jared Kushner, and lawyers frantically recalculating her personal legal exposure. The prosecutors didn't have to threaten. They just had to point out the growing pile of documents with her signature on them and ask the pointed, existential question. When does the loyalty you owe your father start looking a whole lot like the complicity you owe the federal government? The image of the poised professional, the one who tried to sand down her father's rougher, more problematic edges, was now facing the ultimate moral stress test. Cameras off, stakes existential. Margaret Chen started soft, building the narrative slowly, asking about Ivanka's roles in the Trump Organization, executive vice president, major development projects from the Scottish Highlands to the oil fields of Azerbaijan. Ivanka's voice, we hear, was detached, clinical, like she was describing a corporate structure chart written by someone else. Then came the exhibit. Projected onto the wall like a terrible corporate holiday photo was an internal email from June 2016. Sent by Ivanka Trump to her father, Donald Trump Jr., and a few high-level executives. Subject line: Moscow Tower financing package. The entire political universe had publicly denied any active business in Russia during the campaign. But right there, in 12-point font, was Ivanka's summary of a meeting with a sanctioned Russian banking official detailing a proposed multi-$100 million construction loan. She noted the paramount need for pre-election secrecy and confirmed her father's personal approval to move forward with the preliminary architectural blueprints. The jurors, we imagine, were practically leaning over the railings. This wasn't speculation or a blogger's rumor. This was documentary evidence with the sender's email address right there. Asked to explain the email under oath, after taking a visible moment to acknowledge the monumental political confrontation she was initiating, Ivanka began to speak. She confirmed her father's direct, hands-on involvement in the Russia Tower project throughout the campaign. She described planning sessions in Trump Tower where floor plans were reviewed and discussions were held about which Russian oligarchs were in the market for a luxury penthouse. This was the strategy conceived by Trump and his longtime attorney, Michael Cohen, publicly deny, privately execute, knowing that a win in the election meant a final deal with the irresistible leverage of the American presidency. But that bombshell was just the appetizer. Chen swiftly moved to a series of financial statements submitted to Deutsche Bank for loan applications, documents bearing Ivanka's signature, attesting to their accuracy. The dramatic confrontation was now moving from political deceit to cold, hard financial fraud. Side by side on the screen, the jury saw the loan applications next to the tax documents filed with the IRS for the exact same properties in the exact same years. The discrepancy wasn't a mistake, it was a comedy sketch, a Scottish golf course valued at $200 million for the bank, magically shrinking to $60 million for the taxman. A Manhattan building's rental income, $28 million on the loan application, $14 million on the tax return. A systematic pattern of inflation for credit and deflation for taxes. Ivanka, in that detached, corporate voice, did not claim ignorance. Instead, she described the process where her father would personally adjust the valuations, often with handwritten notes, instructing his accountants to make it look better for the banks, while keeping the IRS versions as low as possible. She recalled raising questions about whether this practice crossed legal lines in a 2017 meeting, only to have her father dismiss the worry with the familiar refrain, "That's how the family has always done business." The political drama was escalating. The daughter was not just betraying a confidence, she was describing, in detail, the methodology of the alleged crimes. This was the moment the walls around the former president started to shake. Realizing the call was coming from inside the house, the confrontation moved from historical financial fraud to the more immediate issues of power and influence. Prosecutor Chen didn't let up, transitioning to the murky, gray areas of Ivanka's White House tenure, which, let's be honest, were less gray and more pitch black with flashing red lights. We're talking about the encrypted signal messages between Ivanka and a foreign business partner. Here's the punchline. Ivanka was simultaneously serving as a White House advisor on women's economic empowerment and negotiating trademark approvals for her fashion brand in the same Middle Eastern country. The messages confirmed she was meeting directly with government officials whose foreign policy decisions were directly influenced by her father. She had to admit, under the polite yet firm interrogation, that she had selectively forgotten to disclose these business discussions in her White House ethics filings. Her defense, that she thought her fashion business was separate from her advisory role, was met with the silent, collective eye roll of 23 grand jurors who understood exactly how foreign officials saw her, the package deal. The prosecution then piled on the political tension, playing excerpts of video depositions from other Trump Organization employees. These witnesses described meetings where Ivanka was present while her father openly discussed using his official political position to pressure foreign governments. One particularly dramatic account involved a conference call where Trump allegedly told a Middle Eastern leader that a key piece of U.S. military aid could be significantly expedited if certain business regulations were conveniently relaxed for Trump properties in the region. Ivanka was listed on the White House visitor logs for that call, providing undeniable proof of her proximity to the alleged abuse of power. The documents and the testimony established a clear, direct political confrontation, the blending of private profit with public office. Then came the narrative shift to the biggest political confrontation of them all, the events surrounding January 6. Ivanka, according to multiple witnesses and her own testimony, was in the room for at least 3 crucial meetings in December 2020 where her father discussed strategies to overturn the election results. She was a witness to his blatant dismissal of legal advice confirming there was no constitutional path to reject the Electoral College certification. She listened as he called state election officials, pressuring them to find the necessary votes to change the outcome. Her testimony confirmed the political, open secret Trump knew he had lost. The fraud claims were, as both his daughter and son-in-law explicitly told him, totally unsupported by evidence. Yet, he proceeded anyway, setting the course for the Capitol attack. The most damning, gut-wrenching moment of the grand jury testimony concerned the hours immediately following January 6. Ivanka detailed her father's reaction as the chaos unfolded. His initial resistance to calling off the rioters, his white-hot rage at Vice President Mike Pence for choosing the Constitution over political loyalty, and his viewing of the television coverage from the White House dining room, where he allegedly made comments about the crowd's fierce loyalty. She testified that the only reason he finally agreed to record a video telling the rioters to leave was after a panicked, unified warning from multiple advisors, including herself, that his criminal liability would be absolute if anyone died and he had done nothing to stop the violence. This testimony was a direct, explosive contradiction of his later public claims of wanting to stop the violence immediately. The hours passed, and the emotional weight in the chamber became crushing. The grand jurors weren't just hearing about abstract white-collar crime. They were listening to a daughter recount watching her father commit acts she now understood as criminal, acts she, to varying degrees, had participated in or enabled. This wasn't a political foe, this was his favorite child, the one he trusted most, systematically dismantling the very political and financial kingdom he built on the foundation of unquestioning loyalty. The prosecutors, Margaret Chen leading the charge, made sure every major claim was immediately corroborated. When Ivanka described the financial statement fraud, they brought in forensic accountants who testified the discrepancies were statistically impossible to be legitimate valuation differences. When she talked about January 6, they displayed her own frantic text messages from that day, including one sent to her father's chief of staff begging, "Get Dad to make a statement." Now, the documents were overwhelming, but the one-two punch of the paper evidence combined with the daughter's heartbreaking personal testimony created a case that was now, legally speaking, indestructible. The session concluded, and Ivanka Trump was whisked away, escorted by U.S. Marshals to a secure location, looking like she had just survived a week in an ethical vacuum chamber. The prosecutors stayed behind, basking in the success of the unprecedented testimony. They now had the foundation for indictments ranging from financial fraud to conspiracy to defraud the United States. The walls of loyalty Trump had demanded for decades had been officially breached. And the breach came from the one person he always considered untouchable. The secrecy held for nearly 72 hours, the silence before the political earthquake. Then, a cryptic tremor. A legal journalist tweeted late one Thursday about a major development, and a cooperating witness that meant indictments were expected imminently. The social media world immediately melted down, throwing out names of former staff and disgruntled lawyers. But nobody, absolutely nobody, guessed the truth because it was simply too dramatic, too classically tragic. The confirmation of the political confrontation didn't come from the courthouse, it came from the source of all good drama, a leaking family friend. This source, having spoken to Donald Trump days after the testimony, let slip to a reporter that Trump was utterly livid about his daughter's betrayal, raging in private about her cooperation with the corrupt system. The moment the name Ivanka Trump and the phrase grand jury testimony against father hit the wire, every major news network immediately cut to a special report. The cable news screens screamed the shocking headline, amplified by the sheer, brutal political drama of the family dynamic. The reaction was seismic. Trump's remaining defenders in Congress initially tried the usual political defense, fake news. But as the confirmations mounted, the political calculation shifted immediately to attacking Ivanka herself. They questioned her loyalty, suggesting she was pressured by prosecutors, or manipulated by Jared Kushner, always the easy scapegoat. But these attacks felt hollow and desperate. A cheap B-plot in a major dramatic series. You simply cannot spend a decade elevating someone as the perfect, brilliant, loyal daughter and then, the moment she tells the truth under oath, suddenly claim she is an untrustworthy liar without admitting your own catastrophic lack of judgment. Trump himself, defying the desperate pleas of his lawyers, provided the dramatic response the media was waiting for. He posted a furious, vintage statement on his social media platform, a rambling, incoherent blend of denial, attack, and overwhelming self-pity. He claimed Ivanka was forced to testify, that prosecutors threatened her, and that she barely remembers events from years ago. The statement was a clear indicator that Trump was absolutely terrified, lashing out at everyone, including his own daughter, in a preemptive political strike against testimony he knew was devastating precisely because of its source. The legal community immediately recognized the massive political and legal significance. Former prosecutors explained on air that testimony from a family member, especially one this close to the center of power, was rare, powerful, and created a massive pressure cooker for every other potential witness. If the golden daughter was willing to tell the truth, what excuse did anyone else have? Legal historians immediately drew parallels to the dramatic testimony of John Dean against Nixon, but conceded that the sheer familial betrayal in this case elevated the drama to unprecedented levels. The global implications of potentially imprisoning a former American president, the ultimate political spectacle, were immediately apparent. It touched everything from military alliances to intelligence sharing to how foreign nations viewed the stability of the American political system. As the weeks passed and the formal, heavily detailed indictments were unsealed, the full, devastating scope of Ivanka's testimony became public knowledge. The indictment documents, running into hundreds of pages of intricate legal language, repeatedly referenced Witness 1, the cooperating witness who provided detailed, first-hand testimony on the defendant's business practices, political conduct, and, critically, his state of mind during the most egregious events. Legal experts, analyzing the specific meetings and conversations referenced, instantly concluded that Witness 1 had to be Ivanka. Only she had that level of access, that proximity to the inner sanctum. Trump's defense team now faced the true nightmare scenario they always feared. A prosecution case built not just on paper trails and disgruntled former employees, but on direct, personal evidence from the person who spent decades at his side. Their defense strategies were laughably limited. They could attack Ivanka's credibility. But how do you call the most trusted source for a decade a liar? They could argue coercion, but the judge had already made it clear that a fully lawyered, uncharged witness testifying voluntarily before a grand jury does not constitute coercion. Privately, some of Trump's lawyers, the ones who hadn't completely lost touch with reality, began whispering the dreaded, politically impossible words, plea deal. Trump, predictably, refused even to hear the suggestion of pleading guilty. His public statements escalated into a state of glorious, unhinged political drama, ranting about a deep state conspiracy that had brainwashed his own daughter and turned her against him. He suggested, with a straight face, that someone might be impersonating her. These statements were so detached from the reality of the courtroom that legal observers began seriously floating the ultimate defensive Hail Mary, pursuing an incompetence defense. Because, frankly, no other strategy looked viable against the evidence. The first scheduled court appearance, the formal arraignment, approached with a level of security that made the city look like a military occupation. Federal agents, local police, and the National Guard were on standby, prepping for the inevitable political confrontation with his most zealous supporters. The city where the courthouse was located essentially shut down for the political spectacle. Trump's motorcade looked less like a transportation detail and more like a military convoy. He walked into the courthouse projecting his usual defiant bravado, but insiders noted he looked visibly older, diminished, the weight of the situation finally cutting through the political performance. Inside the courtroom, he was reduced to the role he feared most, just another defendant facing criminal charges. The presiding judge, a no-nonsense jurist with zero tolerance for political theater, made it immediately clear that Trump would receive no special celebrity treatment. The rules of evidence, the rules of the court, they applied equally. When Trump's lawyer tried the inevitable motion arguing his client couldn't receive a fair trial because of media coverage, the judge's response was a masterpiece of legal confrontation. Publicity is not grounds for dismissal when the publicity stems directly from the defendant's own actions and public statements. Upon being released on bail, Trump finally, and eerily, walked out without stopping to make a statement. The silence was deafening, a dramatic sign that he was, finally, taking the threat to his freedom seriously. The months leading up to the trial became a full-blown media circus. Every pre-trial motion was dissected on cable news. The defense repeatedly tried to get Ivanka's grand jury testimony excluded, arguing coercion or privilege. Each motion was shot down by the judge, who found no legal basis to bar the testimony of a cooperating, lawyered-up, uncharged witness. Meanwhile, the prosecution, emboldened by Ivanka's dramatic example, added more cooperating witnesses to their roster. When the golden child flips, everyone else knows their loyalty clock is ticking. The biggest question hanging over the entire legal drama was whether Ivanka would testify at trial. The grand jury was private. No cameras, no defense cross-examination. The trial, however, meant sitting on the stand in open court, facing her father across the room, and enduring a brutal, aggressive cross-examination from his renowned defense team. The political and emotional stakes were impossibly high. The defense, facing an undeniable mountain of evidence, made the only strategic choice available to them. They decided to attack Ivanka directly. They began planting satirical, ugly stories in friendly media outlets, questioning her motives, suggesting she was seeking revenge, or acting to save her own business interests. They hinted at family jealousy and resentment. The attacks were personal, desperate, and fundamentally distasteful, but the public reaction was largely negative. Even the most die-hard Trump supporters found it deeply uncomfortable to watch a father's legal team systematically attempt to destroy his daughter's reputation just to avoid legal consequences. Polling showed that this family civil war was finally causing a significant percentage of loyal Republicans to question their support. Inside the crumbling Trump family empire, the divisions deepened into an unhealable political chasm. Ivanka stopped communicating with her father entirely, lawyers serving as the only conduit. Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump were caught in an impossible, agonizing political confrontation between their unwavering loyalty to their father and their relationship with their sister. The Trump Organization, already struggling, began to internally cannibalize itself as family members fought over what was left. The trial began on a cold morning in late spring, almost 2 years after Ivanka's secret testimony. The courthouse was a physical confrontation zone, supporters chanting about a rigged system, while opponents demanded accountability. Inside, the courtroom was packed for the ultimate political show. Margaret Chen delivered a 3-hour opening statement, spanning decades of alleged fraud, corruption, and the attempt to overturn a democratic election. She laid out the case but reserved the dramatic climax for one witness. A person who would tie everything together, because she was there for all of it and finally decided that loyalty to country must outweigh loyalty to family. When Chen uttered those words, Trump visibly reacted, whispering furiously to his lawyer, knowing exactly who was coming next. The prosecution's case was methodical, building slowly over several weeks. Document experts, forensic accountants, former employees, and White House aides, each witness built the scaffolding. But the jury could sense the ultimate, dramatic moment approaching. The emotional and political climax arrived on a Tuesday afternoon during the trial's 7th week. The prosecutor stood and delivered the line that immediately became legendary: "The United States calls Ivanka Trump." The courtroom erupted in hushed whispers, instantly silenced by the judge's authoritative gavel. Ivanka walked in, flanked by U.S. Marshals, dressed conservatively, her expression a mask of practiced neutrality. She walked straight to the witness stand, making sure not to look at her father, who stared at her with a face described as a terrifying blend of fury and profound personal pain. She was sworn in, her voice clear and steady, promising to tell the truth. The final political confrontation between father and daughter had begun. For 3 intense days, Ivanka testified. She calmly confirmed her grand jury testimony, detailing her father's direct involvement in the Moscow Tower project despite public denials. She meticulously described the financial fraud, explaining how her father would personally alter property valuations and instruct employees to manufacture numbers to suit the purpose, whether for a bank loan or a tax deduction. She testified about the January 6 planning sessions, confirming her father's full awareness that he had lost the election and his subsequent decision to pursue the results overturning scheme anyway. She recounted the conversations where he expressed little remorse for the violence, only anger at those he felt had politically betrayed him. The cross-examination was predictably brutal. Trump's lead defense attorney, a master of aggressive, dramatic tactics, tried every trick in the book, painting Ivanka as a bitter, vengeful daughter, a liar trying to save her own skin from legal exposure. But Ivanka remained remarkably calm, her voice never wavering. simply stating that she was there because she was subpoenaed and because she took an oath. When the defense attorney, in a final, desperate move of political theater, suggested she was motivated by hatred of her father, she quietly delivered the line that instantly defined the trial. She responded that she loved her father but could not lie for him in a criminal trial. Then came the moment of highest dramatic tension. Late on the third day, the defense attorney asked why, if she truly believed crimes had been committed, she didn't come forward sooner. Ivanka paused, and the mask finally slipped. Emotion broke through her professional composure. She said, "I hoped it would never come to this. I hoped he would take responsibility. That he would stop. That somehow we wouldn't end up here. But he didn't stop. And I have children who will one day ask me what I did when it mattered." The courtroom, spectators and participants alike, was absolutely silent. Even Trump looked momentarily shattered, perhaps finally realizing this was no longer about political strategy or legal posturing, but about the profound, irreversible moral choice his daughter had made. The prosecution rested shortly after Ivanka's testimony concluded. The defense team put on a token case, calling character witnesses and a parade of experts trying to explain away the evidence. But everyone in the courtroom knew the trial had been decided during those 3 days of profound filial confrontation. Ivanka Trump had sat on the stand and dismantled her father's decades-long defenses with her own words and her own experiences. The jury deliberated for 4 long, painful days. When they returned, the verdict was delivered, guilty on multiple, significant counts, including financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Trump showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Staring straight ahead, the political fighter finally defeated. He was immediately remanded into custody pending sentencing. The judge ruling that the severity of the crimes, his history of attacking witnesses, and his efforts to undermine legal proceedings made him both a flight risk and a danger to the community. 6 weeks later, the sentencing hearing provided the final, dramatic act. The prosecution demanded a significant prison term, arguing that Trump had abused the highest office in the land and shown zero remorse. The judge, in delivering the sentence, spoke directly to the defendant, reminding him that no president had ever been in this position, but that the rule of law demands consequences for criminal conduct, regardless of former position or political power. She sentenced Donald Trump to 15 years in federal prison. Trump was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. His political career was over. His business empire was collapsing, and his family was fractured beyond all repair. As he passed the gallery, he searched for Ivanka one last time, but she was gone. She had retreated from the public spotlight after her testimony, starting the painful process of rebuilding her life away from politics, away from the immense, suffocating shadow of her father. She carried the weight of knowing her moral choice had destroyed her relationship with the man who raised her. The aftermath sent shockwaves through the American political system. Trump's remaining supporters clung desperately to conspiracy theories, but the most loyal could not escape the fact that his own daughter had testified against him. The Republican Party began a painful, agonizing process of re-examination, trying to determine how their political identity had been hijacked and what it would take to regain credibility. Ivanka, meanwhile, became a profoundly polarizing figure, hailed as a courageous truth-teller by some, condemned as a traitor by others. She retreated from public view, focusing on her children, processing the immense trauma. The consensus among friends was that she carried tremendous guilt, not for testifying, but for not acting sooner, for enabling her father's behavior for so long before finally drawing a definitive, costly moral line. The testimony of Ivanka Trump became a permanent fixture in legal history, a case study in ethical confrontation and the profound conflict between familial loyalty and moral obligation. Years later, in a rare, single interview, she spoke publicly about her decision for the first time. Her words resonated with millions, capturing the essence of the drama. "I spent my whole life learning that family comes first. That you protect your own no matter what. But there has to be a limit. There has to be a point where you say that some principles are more important than any relationship. I would make the same choice. Because the alternative was to be complicit in the destruction of everything I told my children to believe in." That statement, more than any legal verdict or political fallout, cemented the legacy of the ultimate confrontation. Ivanka Trump did not set out to be a hero, she was, by her own admission, a person who enabled much of the corruption. But when finally forced to choose, she chose the truth. And that choice, with all its shattering consequences, stands as a testament to the possibility of individual moral courage, even when the choice costs you absolutely everything you once held dear. The man who built his identity on winning at all costs was ultimately brought down, not by political enemies, but by the devastating, quiet moral choice of his own daughter.